You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 38 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined here always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, Brendan. It's kind of the middle of the holiday period. I'm on a couple of weeks off, so just enjoying some downtime. Catching up on some stuff that I've sort of fallen behind on. TV shows, movies, some games, and just some stuff for the channel. Which is, it's been nice to not have to wake up at a set time every day and check my emails, and just a bit relaxing. How about you? You still in Colorado?
Yeah, so I'm still snowed in on top of a mountain. We got more snow last night. I think we'll be able to get out tomorrow. Just like yesterday was particularly bad because it was like literally just black ice. So actually, I think the more snow might help us, but we'll see. So just chilling on top of the mountain with this bad internet.
Yeah.
Anyway, Hayden, it's almost the end of 2021, and today Hayden and I are going to be talking. Or not be talking, but we're going to be going over our biggest level ups in Flesh and Blood in 2021, which is crazy to think, right? If we think about Flesh and Blood a year ago, I mean, so much has happened. It's unbelievable to think that we started Arsenal Pass maybe 9 months ago, and probably 12 months ago, I was barely even playing the game, right? Like, I played a little bit at the start, but wasn't really playing a lot. And to think about where I am now, it feels like I've been playing for, like 2-3 years. To think about it all happened in 2020 is just crazy. It's been a wild ride. But yeah, Hayden and I have collected 5 points each of our biggest level ups. Some of them might be the same. There might be some overlap. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what our biggest takeaways were from 2020 regarding Flesh and Blood. But Hayden, the news.
Well, no real news this week. I mean, it's kind of, it's the holiday period. It's pretty quiet. I mean, there was a story that went up on the Fab TCG website, which is a story about Lexi. I think it's called An Adventure or something, and it involves Lexi and a bard and a smith and a magician, which is interesting. So if you are into the lore side of Flesh and Blood, or you want some speculation about what we might see in Everfest, because the story is directly related to Everfest. It's directly related to Everfest. Sorry, go and check it out on the website, on the Fab TCG website. It's quite a long read, but it's interesting and it's really well written. So I wanted to shout that out. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, no kind of news from our side. On the YouTube front, we've still got videos going up on the channel. We've got our usual, time in the round every week still going up. We've got the pod, of course, which you'll listen to right now. And then we still have some gameplay videos going up as well. We've done a bit of a farewell tour to Welcome to Wraith. We had a classic constructed Welcome to Wraith only game go up yesterday, which is an awesome game. I had a lot of fun playing that. I know you did, Brendan. Maybe more fun than I did. And then, of course, we have our sealed game that we played last week. And we do also have a deck tech coming this week. I think by the time this pod drops, it'll be out or about to be out. So that's going to kind of round out the year for us.
Yeah, I do have to say I do slightly disagree with your sentiment on the news. I would say that's huge news to finally get announced the bard. I really hope that we do see see a young bard in the set. Magician is interesting, right? Are we getting another wizard? What is it? Obviously, I think you said there was like a smith or something, but yeah. Everybody's been waiting for the bard, so hopefully we get our young bard. Just a preview of the adult bard we'll be getting in the set after that. But Hayden, let's talk about your week in Flesh and Blood.
You're riling everyone up with the bard talk, I mean, this week's been pretty quiet. It's been nice to have some downtime. Haven't had a fixed testing schedule. Just been getting in games, preparation for nationals, which hopefully that still gets to go ahead in end of January. So feeling a lot more confident about sort of where I sit with the class constructor format and draft. Did a lot of drafts towards the end of this month, which has been great. And now just really focusing on class constructed, trying to lock in the deck that I want to play and just work out matchups and things like that. So yeah, feeling pretty good. How about yourself? I guess it's kind of been a week off for you, right?
Yeah, this is the longest I've taken off of Flesh and Blood since we kind of started our daily testing. So yeah, it feels weird, right? All of my skills are just
out the window,
just going away from me. Yeah, at extremely fast speeds, and I'll just be totally washed up by the time I get home. But just chilling, sitting in the mountains, enjoying nature, and hanging out. All right, Hayden. There is no Command and Cookout because it is so cold up here in Colorado. So let's just go ahead and head into the main topic of the pod.
Yeah, before we do, I do just want to put a call out for questions to the Commander Cookout. I think we're pretty much up to date with our questions that we've had submitted. We're going to leave off any. I think there might be one remaining question, which we'll get to in January. But yeah, just putting a call out for questions for the Commander Cookout. You can send those in to us, in the YouTube comments below. You can DM us on Twitter, or you can email them into arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. And questions from, I guess, questions about the meta, questions about, heroes, decks, cards, or whatever you want it to be, play styles. Any questions are welcome, and a great opportunity to get your question on the pod and our sort of take on those questions. But yeah, a bit of a quicker one this week. Let's move on to, as you say, the main topic, our biggest level ups of Flesh and Blood in 2021. And 2021, as you said, it's been a marquee year for Flesh and Blood. I mean, you said crazy to think a year ago, we didn't even have an OP program, really. I mean, we hadn't had the calling series announced yet for the US. We'd had a handful of callings in New Zealand, Australia, and the original callings, and we hadn't even had Skirmish yet. That's how crazy it was that 12 months ago, Skirmish was, I don't even think, announced yet at the time. So it's been a crazy old 12 months, and what a crazy, sort of first year for us as Arsenal Pass as well. Like you said, Brendan, we started in Monarch, so less than 9 months ago even that we kicked off, and that's
Wild.
That's included our first meeting, me and you, from Orlando to some Road to Nationals wins to developing our team and our friendship as well between the group that we have, and just making a lot of new friends in the game as well. It's been an awesome sort of past few months, and then 12 months with 2021. So I want to talk about our biggest level ups, but before we get into sort of the, I guess, gameplay level ups and how we've gotten better as players and the things that we're focused on, and maybe where we're going to continue to focus in 2022, what have been some of your personal highlights of 2021 in Flesh and Blood, Brendan?
Yeah, so I would start it off by saying I met some of like my best friends and the people that I'm currently spending the most time with on a day-to-day basis during this year and through this game. And it's just insane to think that I met Hayden, Dante, Zach, Tim, Dan, and like so many other people literally less than a year ago. Because these people are, some of these people I spend, at least 2 hours a day every day with. And the other people, I've met, people like Rob Seigel in Dallas and Vegas and Cincinnati, just all over the United States. It's just been a ridiculous ride. And speaking of that, I mean, throughout this year, I was able to travel across the United States, not too much, right? But I'd never been to a place like Cincinnati before. And with Road to Nationals, I traveled to Oklahoma, I traveled to Kansas, and it was just a wild ride. And I think that next year, I'll be changing that phrase from traveling across the United States to traveling across the world. So very, very excited for that. Another point is, so I did launch the Fab Gauntlet this year, which we've toned back because the work was immense for the payoff. But that was a really interesting project Project Experiment. It was a tournament server that we ran every day on Monday, where we were able to host like very, very good prizes and pretty big events, like 50 to 80 people sometimes, and stream it. And Dante and I would commentate it on Twitch and then post it on YouTube. So although that time has passed, it was a really cool thing to actually start up and then watch it become successful. Because I remember the beginning was a freaking grind. Like Dante and I used to do DM campaigns where we would personally direct message every single person in the server trying to get them to sign up for that Monday. And this is when we had like 16 people. It was brutal.
Yeah.
And then my final point here is that I actually started winning. All right, so I think I had a pretty successful 2019 and I guess like early 2020 of Flesh and Blood. But 2021 was really kind of my breakout year. So especially in the Road to National seasons, and I had a top 8 in the calling season. It was just a great kind of year for me in progression as a player and just, development. So yeah, looking forward to 2022.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think I just wanted to shout out the work that you and Dante did on the Fab Gauntlet. It was at a time where there was, very little to no in-person play in Europe and North America, and that provided, an outlet for some, players, kind of the extension of the skirmish season for these like competitive players to jump in, or people who wanted to grind and play with sort of an international community. And it was an awesome thing to have. You had players like Davis Kingsley, you obviously had like Rob Seigel and stuff in there at times. And, I managed to jump in and play one as well, which was awesome. It was such a cool experience. So just wanted to shout out that what you guys offered at that time with the support of a couple of stores was just fantastic. For me, some of the personal things. I mean, it's got to be very similar to you. The people I've met over this past year through playing Flesh and Blood and through, of course, Arsenal Pass. I mean, my trip to Orlando that I was very fortunate to be able to make from all the way over the other side of the world, the 24-hour trip that I was able to make to Orlando and meet so many awesome people, both that I'd spoken to previously through just, of course, yourself, Brendan, Zach, Tim, Dante, just meeting everyone, and then also being able to meet some of our Arsenal Pass listeners and viewers was just such an awesome experience, and I'm so grateful to be able to have done that. I feel so lucky. It just kind of worked at the right time with kind of the situation. For instance, I don't think I'd be able to make that trip right now. So very, very awesome experience. And then just what the journey I think we've taken as players, I think has been huge. And obviously going to talk about that from like a level up side, but just like the personal standpoint it's been such a great experience. This idea of like international testing team and working on different formats and learning and progressing as like a person as well, I think has been awesome. So yeah, I think those are my two kind of biggest takeaways.
It's crazy to think how much of an impact this little game has had on your life so far.
Like it's huge.
I mean, it's I don't even think it's up for debate at this point that it's probably changed your life, right? It has literally been a life-changing experience, this game. It's just wild to think, and we're only in the very, very beginnings of this journey. So I don't know, kind of a little bit of sentiment.
Yeah, I was gonna say enough sentimental. Let's move on to some level ups.
Go for it.
All right. Well, why don't I kick us off? So, yeah, as Brendan said, we're going to talk through some of just our biggest sort of level ups in play and what we think has made us better Flesh and Blood players in 2021. If we think that, I think we've both sort of progressed as players.
I would hope so.
My first one is that it's an interesting one, and that's that theory is perhaps your biggest tool in deck design and game plan design, or at least it is for me. And what I mean by this is that you can go and you can build decks and test them and tweak them and tune them, and that takes a lot of time. And one thing that I really found this year is that if you have a really good grounding in theory of what you want your decks to do, how you want to play things out, card interactions, you find these like really cool 2-card interactions, or you understand how games ebb and flow. So like the flow of a game over, the three phases, the beginning, the mid, and end game, then you have this real advantage, I think, on building decks and game plans. And a really good example of this, I think, is like the game plan that we came up with against Fatigue, in the chain matchup. So, like for, I think 2 weeks or so when sort of Snag started to become big, it was like, okay, like Snag is now the card that Fatigue plays to beat chain. Then before we'd even like played games, we came up with ideas, right? We had theory about, okay, what if you do this? What if you get to recycle cards? What if you stack this for the in-game and you don't care about rift binds? And
yeah, it's actually it was a crazy concept too, and I think you're like what was crazy about that concept was that we were going from not really stacking our decks to trying to play a game plan that only centered around those few cards being in the perfect positions at the end of the deck. And like you said, the theory is so important. I think it just gets more important as we expand the hero pool and expand the card pool, because the work requirement and time requirement to test everything it just becomes virtually impossible, right?
It's huge. And rather than trying, and I think this is something that I did in the past, was like just throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks, try as many things as possible. And really, now taking a step back, a lot of those things I can think about and go, actually, I just know that won't work. It doesn't sit in my sort of what I know as accepted knowledge. And sometimes there's things that break that, and I've definitely been proven wrong over the year. But I would say like 90% of the time, the expectation I have with like the theory I lay out is probably how it's going to work, and that saves so much time. It saves so much effort. It means that we can be more efficient with like playing games. It means that my games are more enjoyable, to be honest, because I'm not just trying random crap, to be honest, at an armory event. Like I get to, I might have an idea and it might not be perfect, but like I know there's seeds of it there because the theory is there. And like 9 times out of 10 that's true. But then 1 time out of 10, actually my theory is not correct, and it does feel a bit bad, and that's fine. But we just move on. But if that's happening 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 times instead of 1 out of 10 times, it's just a waste of my time and energy, I think. And I think it would be less enjoyable to me. So I think this kind of level up has both been great for progression in the game and, building better decks and building better game plans and designing better game plans into matchups, but also just my enjoyment of the game because I'm spending less dead time where I'm having less fun.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to Dante for that, because his theories tend to fail us. I think it's 9 out of 10 times. No, it's just funny back in the Monarch format when we did have the chain deck, and it was becoming quite dominant in our testing group. I remember Dante was definitely going out of his comfort zone and building decks and putting a lot of passion and a lot of himself into it, right? And then he just played against chain and just got smacked. And I've never. Oh man, some of those responses, it was rough. You'd have to go take a break. A few days later, he'd come back. But yeah, for sure, the theory. I just wanted to get a little sentiment in this because it was just a hilarious thing to kind of recollect on from the Monarch format. But you're totally right. Like, approaching based on theory is important, and then you take that theory and you test it, for the practicality in testing, and you will switch up the cards and switch up the game plans, all of that. But in order to kind of pick from this massive pool, you definitely need to be approaching with theory from the beginning.
You start with an idea rather than start with a group of cards and then try and find a thread between those. You already start with the thread and you build around that. And I think that means that when you start building out decks, you have like really solid cores as opposed to like, really solid sort of like a few interactions, and then you're trying to find things in between there. And it's really about like, and if I break down what that theory is, it's like, okay, like how do I attack a game? What ratios of cards do I need? What are the key pain points of my deck? What do I want my average 4-card hand to look like? What do my best 5-card hands look like? How do I get through a mid-game? Like, there's all these interactions. What does a defensive slant do to my deck? What does an aggressive slant do to my deck? Like, there's these kind of steps you can go through. And we did talk about this. We've talked about these kind of things in like our deck building podcasts, and and on Patreon we did a game plan strategy pod as well for our patrons, which is like, I think really dives into this. So I won't go too deep into it because we are kind of going through 5 of these and it'd be quite big. But yeah, I mean, it's just this idea, and it's a seed that I think will continue to grow for me over the next year, and I'm sure beyond, as the game matures and I mature as a player in this game, and our card pool develops as well. I think it's going to be, this is why I kind of put this at number 1, because I think it's going to continue to be really important as the card pool grows.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So my first one here is going to be events. So 2021 really was kind of the premiere of competitive Flesh and Blood and the premiere of events, right? In-person events. We started out with Skirmish, which started online, then we got back into person, headed into Road to Nationals, and into the calling season. And the difference of callings from playing, on your kitchen table at armories was just massive. And we saw an explosion in the growth of the player bases that these events were hosted at. So in the United States, North America, just in general, Europe and Asia, it was just incredible to see this, everybody kind of grow as a player, and the competitive level of Flesh and Blood just increase almost exponentially. But I learned so much from playing these events, from grinding them, from testing for them. The first real success I saw was in the Road to Nationals, series, and that was the first time I'd really committed to trying to be very, very good at a deck and to try to break the meta. And I think that at that point we did. So it was really cool to see how that work paid off and see what worked in testing and what didn't. So moving forward to the future, I learned so much throughout this year through playing these events, especially some of these callings, like these, you go through these very long events, tons of people, and there's just so much to account for. And it's just, that kind of experience is invaluable in terms of increasing your development as a player. And I think that it will help me out a lot as we move forward into the series in 2022 with the Pro Tour and eventually Worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the experience of events is, you cannot replace it. And I think I would agree with this. Although I didn't get to play, obviously, as many events as you this year, I did get to play, be it all online. I get to play 2 Road to Nationals, and I did get to play 2 callings in a Pro Quest.
Yeah.
I think each of those events gave me takeaways. I had takeaways from those events about things that I was doing well as a player and things that I wasn't doing well as a player. And I think being introspective about those events is great. I think walking away from the Orlando calling, a lot of things that we had talked about in testing and done in testing was able to be, executed. I think it was my first opportunity to probably play an event since, really starting a bit more rigorous testing and trying to get serious about the game. And I think that's really important. So I couldn't agree more, Brendan.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to those 12+ hour online skirmish events and how much that has prepared my mental game for the future, because there is nothing worse than that.
Oh yeah, I loved waking up at 3 a.m. to play some skirmishes, and I think I did it twice and just never again.
And then you run into a draw. That must have felt
goodness.
great.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. My second kind of level up is an interesting one, and it's a bit of a lot of my level ups I think have been journeys or experiences over this past year, and one of these is my learning of just how deep the draft format in Flesh and Blood is, and I think it's something that I've only just come to appreciate recently. And I want to start by just telling a little bit about this. So, Welcome to Wraith, I think was like it's a format that I love, the sealed format, the limited format, the draft format, just limited overall. Particularly sealed, but the draft format's great as well. And there's some really cool archetypes in there, but we don't have the talent system. There's a lot of like surface level stuff. You get into Monarch, and I think that's when we really start to obviously realize that it's the first talented heroes. And I didn't spend enough time with that draft format, I think. And looking back, I was pretty bad at it, to be honest. I thought I was alright, but I think I'm pretty bad at it. And we get into Tales, and it's obviously a format for this season. We've had three limited callings. And Nationals has draft portion in it. So it's been a bit more of a focus, and I've been able to play a bit more of this limited format. And it's so deep. Like, the seal format is not perfect, and I agree with people who say that. I think I'm less aggressive on that than some others, but the draft format is phenomenal. And it is so skill intensive, I think, in terms of the way that you navigate the draft portion, the way that you understand how cards go up and down. Their value goes up and down depending on your seat. So how you're drafting the hero that you're going to draft into, what your players around you are prioritizing as cards, and then the actual archetype within that you go. And I can give some examples of this, right? So say your seat that you end up drafting into ends up being like an ice all-time deck. And so early on, maybe your first 5 or 6 picks, you kind of, you get like 2 good earth cards. You get like an Ice Quake or something, and like a blue Weave Ice or whatever. You get some stuff, and then you've also got some like an Earth card, and you've got a Briar card, and you've hedged a little bit, and then Ice starts to open up for you. And some of the cards that you could be taking, the value of those change. So if Ice is really open to you from your right, for instance, then there's the likelihood that you get to wheel some of these Ice cards increases. Whereas if there's potentially an old time player to your left, maybe there's 2 to your left. Some of the old time cards, they go up in value. Those cards are not going to wheel. So there's like this real ebb and flow to the draft format, and that's really surface level. To be honest, it goes even deeper than that, I think, in terms of just the cards and how they interact with each other in the archetype. And the big reason for that is that Flesh and Blood is not a card by card game. All the cards are modal, right? So in any given matchup, your cards are going to be doing different roles, and they interact with each other cards so differently. And those cards have different importance depending on like how you want to win the game, how your opponent's trying to win the game, how you draw them, how you pitch them. So yeah, it's probably been, to be honest, one of the biggest level ups I've had towards the end of this year is just understanding how deep the draft format is in Flesh and Blood. And I'm really excited to see what happens with our next set after Everfest and what that draft format looks like, because I think we're going to see players understand this more as well. And as we have limited specialists come into the game, I think they're really going to start to hopefully talk about it, and we'll see just how crazy I think the draft format can be.
Yeah, it's definitely a niche that hasn't been filled quite yet. It's sort of a limited focused content creation. I'm interested to see if we get that, but I totally agree with you that Flesh and Blood drafting is a very unique skill. Whether you can draft in other games, but it's not 100% transferable to this game. So I think that drafting Flesh and Blood is very, very much a learned skill for a player, and being able to participate that at a high level in either your nationals or at some of these limited callings in 2020 is going to suit you very, very well for the upcoming limited tournaments in 2022.
Yeah.
Sorry, 2021. I think I said 2020.
Yeah, 2021 to 2022. I will go out and say this pretty clearly. I don't think we've seen players at even close to being the pinnacle of limited players so far, because I think from just watching the events and seeing how people have drafted and seeing how people have talked about it, that knowledge is continuing to develop, I think, and I don't by any means think that I'm one of the best limited players, but I think I'm getting better, and I think my understanding is starting to develop that there's way, way, way more to this than meets the eye, and I think anyone who sort of says that, the limited format is like variance based and it's luck based, I actually think that the current draft format is far, far and away has less variance in it than the current classic constructor format. So.
For sure. So my next one here is going to be consistency and testing schedule. So we did implement the kind of everydays in 2021, which you absolutely do not need to be doing if you want to get better. But there was something very special about just playing the game every day, and especially playing it with the right people, right? The people I was able to surround myself with in testing, I give all of my, I contribute all of my success to them. Being able to wake up at any given morning and test with people like Hayden Dale, Zach Bunn, Dan Mackay, Dante Delfico. It was just an incredible resource, and I think that anybody who's trying to get better at this game, one of the first things that you should focus on is surrounding yourself with a group of players that help push you to be better, or just push you to achieve your goal, whether that's to be better or to have more fun. But creating that little community around you will help you just, I don't know, get there faster, I guess, whether it's having more fun or getting better. In my case, it was getting better. And I think that all of my development was attributed to the people that were on that grind with me. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So as we head into the next year, will our testing schedule stay the same, or will it differ? Not totally sure, but I think that, our sort of kind of, I guess, proof of concept this year, I would say it was relatively successful, right? Like, we had a very successful road to national season, and I think we overall had a successful calling season as well. So I was very happy with it, and it was just, I'm very grateful that I was able to participate in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you were to extrapolate some of the takeaways there, it's like, it's coming up with some sort of consistency. It's understanding what you need and finding like-minded people who can help you achieve that, and you help them achieve that. So whether that's testing every day, that might be a step too far for a lot of people, and that's fine. But maybe it's, hey, every Saturday we get together and we play for 4 hours, and we have like a really clear idea of what we want to get out of it, and all of us want to win a ProQuest this season, or all of us want to top 8 at ProQuest, or whatever it is. If you've got common goals, I think that's great, and you can push each other to help achieve those. Or it's like, hey, I want to find the best deck for this event, or hey, I don't want to play one of the big 3 decks, but I want to play a deck that I think is really strong in top 8 at ProQuest. Like, your goals could be whatever, to be honest. It could just be, I want to win Armory every week for a month. It doesn't matter. But if you've got a local group or an international group or whatever it might be, but if you can find some like-minded players, as Brendan says, I think it's huge. And it could just be one player. It could be 2, 3, 4, 5 players. I know there's some groups out there who are like semi, they'll test semi regularly, and they're like 9, 10 players sort of things, and they make it work because they all know each other or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think it's a big takeaway.
I think focused and data-driven testing is a big takeaway for me as well. That was something we implemented in 2020. While it's not as fun as jamming games, being able to kind of look back on all of our data and all of our games and have notes was extremely helpful for kind of fine-tuning the final things we needed on a deck to really make it great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that sometimes, like, I've walked away from testing sessions and then two or 3 days later be like, what did I actually learn from that? Because I didn't really take notes or think about it from like a kind of high level perspective of what the takeaways were. And there's some players that we've found in testing, like, I'm not great at that, but I've got some players around me who are better at that than me, like a Dan Mackay, like a Zach Bunn. So that's really helpful. But again, I think it's finding what you need from each thing. I do like that sometimes you can find players that are both like-minded but also can complement each other. I think we've kind of got a bit of that with our group, which is nice.
Definitely. I would say some of the personas are a bit different than the others.
Oh, for sure. We need just to get like the whole team on for like a quick video, and everyone can see how different everyone is. We'll get into an argument within 2 minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. You know what? I did a bit of exercise this morning. I'm struggling for breath at the moment. Number 3. One thing I think I learned, a bit of a painful lesson, I think, for me, was spreading yourself thin on heroes can lead to being a master at none. And I definitely learned this the hard way through the early Tales of Aria season. I think actually our team kind of learned this to a degree, was like a massive detriment to our results in the early part of like the Tales constructed, right? So heading into Orlando and the start of Nationals.
That was our biggest issue, right? I mean, it's tough to kind of analyze in retrospect because we were able to find the deck pretty quickly in Monarch. But yeah, I mean, in Tales, this is, as we head into Everfest, our big takeaway from Tales is like, we have to figure out kind of how to dilute responsibility and focus on, have each player focus on kind of a specific thing, something they're very good at, because we were a bit too spread out in Tales, and we sort of paid for it.
Yeah, and a big one for me, like from a personal perspective, is that I am very much someone who likes to understand as much as possible. So, I play almost every hero and I spend time on, half a dozen heroes. And I think that really hurt me to a degree where, there was probably heroes that aren't my top three sort of heroes that I spent time on that it wasn't good time spent. Like I didn't get better at those heroes necessarily. I didn't understand some of like the key interactions or the key ways to build it because I didn't have enough time to invest in it. But I still spent time and probably wasn't, it was like that. There's like a middle ground, right? So I think there's like diminishing returns on some of these heroes that I spend less time on. And as soon as I start to like increase that time on some of these heroes, but not maybe in the right ways or contribute a next chunk of time to get to the next step, it just really hurts. And I think there's certain heroes that I ended up knowing somewhat, but not knowing well. And while that's some benefit to understand how the game plans might play out or how the kind of the prevailing winds of playing that hero are in the current format is really important. I'm not in a position to innovate on that or to, break it down and rebuild from building blocks because I don't quite understand what those are. Whereas with, my other three heroes, maybe I can do that. So yeah, I think there's this whole balancing act, and you see it. I look at someone like a Cal McCreath, right, who is the Guardian father, right, like the godfather of Guardian, and I think obviously he's really dedicated to one hero now, somewhat to old time as well. And then you've got probably people who have played like every hero under the sun, and I think I've fallen more into that camp of like play hero, spend time with them. I spent 3 months playing Azalea. I've played a lot of Rhinar. I've played a lot of like Viscerai. Spent periods playing through these heroes, and then maybe not necessarily revisiting them. And then I think you have some players who have done really well. Maybe someone like a Matt Rogers who tends to look at like 2, 3, 4 heroes and really understand those heroes as much as possible and get the rewards for that. So I think there's this middle ground that I learned the hard way this year about, and that's probably my focus for 2022 is to like understand why I want to look at certain heroes rather than just for fun or for enjoyment necessarily. I still want to do that to a degree, but at some point I need to go, okay, enough time spent. Let's move on.
For sure. And you're going to laugh at my next point because I'm actually going to flip the script. I'm going to say one of my biggest takeaways was actually playing a ton of different classes and decks. And this is what Hayden has said is correct. So this is not during kind of testing and preparing for a big event, when we're kind of crunching for time, but just overall in 2020, like I really expanded my hero pool and thus my understanding of the game. I think, not
from one hero.
2021. I keep forgetting that. Yeah. So like before 2021, I hadn't played much outside like the Welcome to Wraith heroes and like some Dash, and just being able to play everything helped me understand. That's just how I learn, right? Like it's easier for me to understand how to beat something when I know how it wants to win. So the biggest and the biggest one here is going to be learning Kano. So Kano is an interesting one because when you first look at it, you're like, oh God, this deck is just, you don't know what's going on. It feels like it's totally random. And then you try to play it and it sucks and you lose every game. And you're just like, what? Forget this hero, right? But for me, Kano was kind of, I think learning Kano is one of the keys to being a good Flesh and Blood player. Like it's one of the most rewarding and skill intensive and just tumultuous journeys you can take in this game. And it's so rewarding. And I'm happy that I finally picked it up and I really dedicated to it, right? Like I did 100 games of Kano in like, I think it was like 20 days. And this was totally recorded on an Excel sheet, notes from every single game. And it was that class more than any other class. When I look back through those notes, you can see me getting better and better as I progress through that journey.
Yeah, it's really tangible. I think that's such a cool. I honestly think that piece that you did, that kind of that grind, that recording of data is really tangible and shows you just the improvement that you took. And you could sit there and go, oh, this is when I learned how these cards interact, or this is when I learned how I wanted to stack for certain end games, or this is when I learned that like these two cards are like really powerful combinations, and so I want to arsenal this card a lot more to take advantage of that, or whatever. Or this is where I learned that playing off the top and this matchup is better. So yeah, I love that, and I think that's like that's a balance, right? So you picked up a hero like Kano, you really learned it. You went past that. So if I break it down, there's like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 1 is like somewhat understanding. You understand the hero, you understand its game plans, you play some games with it. I think that's what you're saying is like that's taught you a lot, right? And then Kano you took to like level 3, which is like you master the hero, understand a lot about it. And then level 2 is like, like I learn a bit about it, and I start to learn some like other game plans, and I spend some time on it. But I think that level 2 is can be detrimental, especially when you're trying to test for events. And I think for me, like that's where I've spent a lot of hero time at, and less at number 3. Whereas Brendan, you probably had like 3 heroes at number 3, and then a lot of heroes at number 1. Whereas I had some number of heroes at number 2 and very few heroes at number 3. which is
For sure. And the Kano thing is also, it's just kind of about the journey because it teaches you a lot. Because, I mean, it starts off and it sucks. I mean, you lose everything. And then it gets to like, level 2, like you said, where it's like, it's okay, but you still don't feel like you're always in control and you feel like there's a bit of variance. But there is a level 3 to Kano where you are truly dictating so much in the game. There's so much agency with that deck. It's incredible. And for me, like the reason why I chose Kano is because that was the hero I was most afraid of. Like Hayden, if you recall when we did the Blitz commentary calling, I didn't know anything about Kano. I literally knew nothing. And it was just this big, yeah, it was this big, scary black hole of like a knowledge gap in the game. And I just like, you know what? If I'm going to be good at this game, I got to be good at Kano. I got to understand how this works. So yeah, I mean, that was really it. And it was just, after that, I felt like I was a well-rounded player. And any class is easy after Kano.
Wait till Bard comes out. Yeah, it's interesting. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Kano. I've lost a lot of skirmish finals with Kano, and I punted my first ever skirmish that I played. I punted the final with Kano, so I'm a bit scarred now. But I also did a bit of a wizarding journey in skirmish season 2 to try and catch up to Brendan somewhat. Anyway, so yeah, interesting. We have some like
the wizard journey. You did the Azalea journey.
Yeah, I wonder who's profiting off that one. You can see that we're kind of like, there's 2 points there, and there's a lot of, if there was a Venn diagram of the 2 points we've just had, there's like a perfect point to sit in, I think, with the heroes that you learn to play, and that's get a feel for a lot, and especially those ones that are prominent in the meta, but really understand like 2 or 3. I think that can be so huge, especially, if you have the time. If you know the time, maybe it's like master 1, understand the top 3 or 4 to a degree. Like there's levels to it, and it probably depends on your time, but yeah, there's some good takeaways there, I think, about just some diminishing returns on spending too much time with heroes that probably don't matter in the current meta, especially if you want to be a competitive player. My time with Azalea, my time with Levia maybe wasn't as wise given where we were in the season.
They're going to come back. It'll pay off eventually.
Surely. Yeah, I mean, it was made a bit easier to pick up Lexi, I think, in testing. But anyway, yeah, that was me and then you. So this one's interesting. My next point, and this was like a lesson I learned, and something that I believe, like a belief that I now hold. And we actually just did a Patreon pod about this, so our patrons probably are familiar with me talking about this. But my understanding, or now I guess learning, is that consistency is more powerful a tool than raw skill, I think. And it's at least somewhat, and for now, I think that could potentially change, but it's important to how I choose decks and game plans for parts of the season, and it's going to be really important to me choosing decks and game plans moving forward. And I'll explain this a bit. Knowing a deck that has like a really consistent plan and builds to execute with that plan, I think is just really powerful in Flesh and Blood right now, and you can see examples of this over time, right? So you've got like Dash, you've got you've got Chain in the old format to a degree. You've got Briar, like Cheerios Briar, in this current format. And these are really powerful plans. They're linear, you could say, to a degree. But they're also very consistent because the cards like have replacement level effects. And I think that at the moment outweighs, like playing and understanding these decks to a high degree, outweighs a lot of like skill cap offset. So I think you can be a really good player and you can play more of like a mid-range deck or a deck that requires a lot more important choices or plans that could be, if you muck it up, basically it's more detrimental to mucking up something with Dash, for instance. And I think this has kind of been how the game has been for sort of like the last 18 months, that we're seeing this start to be more important about how you understand decks, and especially where they've got consistent plans. And I think that really does offset like skill cap to a degree, and I think that's influencing how I choose decks and plans now, because there could be a deck or a plan that I really like, but then that deck might have varying plans into a lot of different matchups. And that's a lot to learn, and that's a lot to master. And those plans also might be really difficult to pull off. Like they might involve like deck stacking or setting up specific 5-card hands. And if I have a deck that I think is like close in power level to that, but is a bit more linear, has really consistent plans, at the moment I'm probably going to play that deck because I think it offsets the skill sort of gap that could be there. If that makes sense, Brendan.
Yeah, and just quickly summarize some of this because we went really deep into this.
We were so deep.
The Patreon pod, for sure. But like, if you're thinking about most of the events that we've had exposure to so far, something like a calling, the diversity in what you will face is just massive, right? So if you have one of these less linear decks, sometimes you can have some harder matchups, and you just have to prepare for a lot more, and it's a lot harder for your deck to adapt to a very diverse field. And if you're at something like a calling, where you're liable to see everything, and you're also liable to not see the deck that you're targeting, even if it's 40% of the format. It does feel like a lot of the time it is better to pick the linear deck, the one that's just kind of good into everything, right? The one that's making its opponent adjust to their game plan.
Yeah, like if I'm painting by numbers, right? I'm doing a little paint by numbers, and I use 1 or 2 colors as opposed to trying to use like 7 or 8 colors, I'm going to make less mistakes. I'm going to go over lines a lot, less frequently, right? So it's my analogy for playing these decks that have a bit more consistent linear plans. And I think that just the power level, so if the power level increases in these non-linear decks and these decks that require, multiple different game plans into different matchups, and like their raw power increases, then I'm going to start to favor more of those decks again, I think, because I feel that like me as a player, I can probably utilize some degree of, like leverage of skill with those decks. And I'm sure that's the same for a lot of players out there. And this is again, my personal level up, and something that I've learned is that right now, I think any sort of like golf and skill, even no matter how minuscule it is, maybe I'm slightly better than the player across from me. Maybe I'm slightly worse than the player across from me. I think playing and making a decision on my deck that's a bit more around the consistency of the deck and execution of game plans, especially in these like Brendan says, events where you could run into Kano in round 1, you could run into Azalea or whatever, and my game plans have to change. When I'm playing these more consistent, maybe slightly linear decks, I think that's where I want to be right now. And that's been a big learning for me, I think, because I've really tried, and Brendan knows this, a lot of the decks that I've tried to present during testing have had more complicated plans and maybe been a bit less or very, very non-linear, I think, to a degree.
For sure. It's definitely your niche for a long time there. But yeah, totally agree with you. And I think you can kind of extrapolate from this format as we head into other formats if that's still going to hold true.
Yeah, we'll see.
So my final one here, I think I bundled 2 mine together on accident, but my final one here is just going to be fundamentals. And Hayden, you can kind of help me rattle some of these off. But first one, deck stacking. I thought I knew how to deck stack back before 2021, back in the early days. But I mean, honestly, compared to what we had to do with Chain, it was nothing, right? So that taught me so much about the game, taught me so much about just, I don't know, being kind of present and aware. It's really tough, but once you get it down, it starts to become second nature. The other one's pivot turns. Like pivot turns, utilizing pivot turns correctly in limited is really what I mean, honestly, it's utilizing pivot turns in every format, but in limited, it's really what makes and breaks like good players. And I think that 2021 really forced me to focus in on that, especially the Monarch format. The Monarch format was all about pivot turns. It was ridiculous. Hayden, give me some other fundamentals from just fundamentals that we kind of learned in 2021. Obviously, we knew about them slightly, but before that, I don't think we were employing them to this level.
Yeah, I think maybe we probably knew about them, but we've also honed those during testing, and they've been things that we're focused on. So I think defending efficiently, utilizing our equipment to the fullest. These have been things that we've really learnt about. Understanding the transitions between start, mid, and end game, and what your role is as the in those phases, I think is like really key fundamentals. And just extrapolating the understanding of value out of cards. So I take 2 damage, but actually I just traded for 2 of my opponent's best cards for 2 of my worst cards, for example. There's this concept of trading, and I think it's that fundamental in particular is really interesting because it's something that's not talked about much in Flesh and Blood, because that's like a thing in other TCGs, but the concept of value is very different in Flesh and Blood, and I think it's a bit harder to understand. But yeah, those are probably the main ones from this year that I think we've really sort of tried to hone in on and improve on as players.
Yeah, for sure, and they'll just become ever more important as the skill cap of players in the game increases, and the player pool increases as well. It forces you to really have solid fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So. I think for me, the last one, number 5 for me, actually wraps up a lot of these fundamentals, and that is for me my probably number 5 biggest level up is becoming a much more proficient player at playing both sides of the table. And this is, what I mean by that is I play my side, I understand the fundamentals, but I also try and play from the other side of the table, understand what my opponent's trying to do, when they're trying to do it, and what cards they're probably trying to play or set up. I think I probably learned the most about this during the Monarch sealed season. You talked about pivot turns before, Brendan.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think helped me improve pivot turns and get really good at understanding pivot turns was understanding when my opponent was trying to pivot. So not just when I wanted to pivot, but understanding, actually, hold up, when does my opponent want to pivot? What does their pivot turn look like based on what I know they're playing, how much life they're on, how they've used their cards, how they've sequenced their cards. So are they trying to keep a card in Arsenal here? Are they trying to sequence a pivot turn right now? Or are they trying to set it up? And that kind of knowledge, I think, I would call it counter pivoting, for instance. So my opponent tries to set up a pivot and I actually unleash a pivot before they do, so that it kind of ruins theirs. Is probably one of the biggest pieces for me. It's about understanding, or for me, it's been about understanding what my opponent's game plan is, trying to recognize that as quickly as possible, try and get onto their side of the table and be like, okay, actually, it looks like they're going to try and fatigue me. Oh, actually, no, it looks like they're going to try and attack me for the first 5 or 6 turns, and then they're going to find a point in the game where they try and fatigue me out after that. If I use playing Chain and Road to Nationals as an example. It's sure. Probably, this level up has probably been how I've won so many of my tight games. I think about Orlando. I played a lot of, I think I played 3 or 4 Briar mirrors. I think one of them or 2 of them were Earth Briar, but the mirrors, I think, came down to, for me personally, I think came down to me understanding what my opponent was trying to do on given turns, and that helping me to go back to my fundamentals, using my equipment at the right times, because I understood what my opponent was trying to do on those turns and how they were going to end up trying to win the game. And I can think back to some really punishing lessons I've had on this, where I've welcome to Wraith Draft. I've died to an open the center with Dominate because I wasn't playing the other side of the table, and recognizing that was probably really clearly what my opponent was trying to set up, but I just blanked on it. So yeah, I mean, it's my number 5, but it's been one of my biggest in terms of game wins, I think.
Yeah, this was the first thing I encountered when I started playing games with Hayden. It was really tilting. It's because we were focusing a lot on the Monarch sealed format. Is that, the Monarch was a lot of us. You would set up the entire game kind of for one big pivot turn, and Hayden would always he had a sixth sense for disrupting me right before I was about to do that. It's definitely a lesson that I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, I think that was probably the start of it for me. That's when I was really trying to start to understand those ideas like counter pivoting and just trying to play the other side of the table. And it's a skill that doesn't have, I guess, it's really hard to quantify exactly what the key parts of that skill are, but just some of the things I talked about, I think, are ways where you can start to think about that, really trying to understand how your opponent's trying to win the game, why they're doing the things they're doing, why they're sequencing the way they're sequencing, are they holding a lightning press in hand based on the way that they're playing their cards out? Okay, hold up. They played a, what's the fuse card? The one that gives go again if you fuse a lightning card. I'm so bad with names sometimes. Entwine Lightning. Yeah. They play an Entwine Lightning, but they don't reveal a card. But I'm pretty sure, based on what I've seen so far, that they have the ability to do that. Why are they not doing that? Why are they instead using their Lightning token on this? Or there's all these different things you can think about from your opponent's side of the board and sequencing. And to be honest, one of the best ways is playing that deck 1 or 2 times, 3 or 4 times, and understanding how you should sequence the plays in that deck, and then why your opponent's doing differently.
Yeah. 100%.
Wow.
All right. Well, that wraps up our our big takeaways from 2021. It's been a huge year for Flesh and Blood. We've grown so much. The game looks almost unrecognizable from where it was just a year ago, and I think that's going to continue for the next few years at least, right? As we're still young and we're growing so much, and the introduction of all these different competitive play tournaments, the Pro Tour and Worlds coming up, the $1 million that we have set up for that, it's just going to be incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I guess if there's any of the points that we've covered today that you'd love to hear more about in the future, let us know. Some of these we have covered in previous pods, or we've spoken about them over different sort of, content pieces, but, we could wrap these up again in terms of expanding on some of these if they're ones that you want to hear about. So do let us know in the comments. But otherwise, thank you to everyone for this year. Happy New Year to everyone. And we'll see you in 2022, right, Brendan?
For sure. And the year isn't over until I start chilling. So I'm going to plug the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. Like Hayden said at the top of the pod, we do have tons of content in there, including gameplay, time of the round, where we host a member from the community. Go give it a listen. It's pretty much my favorite section that we do, as well as deck techs and tons of other miscellaneous stuff. So check out the Arsenal Pass YouTube. We are still shooting for that 3,000 subs by the end of the year. We're so close. But I'm starting to lose hope, Hayden. I don't know. But we'll see. We're only like 100 or 200 away. Who knows? Anyway, Hayden and I are both on Twitter. Hayden is located at Fendale, FYEN_Dale, and I am located at Brendan APG. You can find us there. We love engaging with you all on Twitter. And finally, the Arsenal Pass channel does have a Patreon. Our Patreon does have tons of extra content, including extra podcasts, no longer a monthly live session, but now a monthly gameplay breakdown. So most recently, Hayden and I broke down the Hong Kong Nationals finals game. We did a full kind of commentary and breakdown and all that fun stuff because it contains some chain deck stacking, so it was really fun for us. But we have stuff like that on there as well. If we have a deck tech on Arsenal Pass, we host the sideboard guide, deck theory, ratios, everything you need to pick it up and start being competitive on the Patreon there. So anyway, until next time, we'll see you in the next one.
See you later.